Hello, AI explorers, and welcome back to Tingenuity AI. It's long been one of our plans to talk about how you can use artificial intelligence in a variety of industries. And today, my brother and I are going to be speaking about artificial intelligence and how it's being used in healthcare. And so I want to welcome Warren. How's it going?
Hey.
And what do you have to
Doing
share with us about healthcare and AI in the healthcare industry?
Well, there's a lot of AI expanding in every industry, right? And we're seeing it impact so many things from our businesses, our own businesses. But in healthcare, it has some unique qualities, and especially with some of the recent announcements. Google has announced their Amy, the Articulate Medical Intelligence Explorer, which is an AI to help them discover and do better patient care. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then locally, I've heard of my hospital in utilizing AI to impact their patient care protocols and surgeries and other things. So we're going to talk about that broad expanse today. How have you heard anything about healthcare with AI in your area?
Well, so right now I'm in Madrid. I don't know how they use artificial intelligence in healthcare, but I do know that when it comes to records management, that's a big piece. And so as I've looked into the topic, I understand that artificial intelligence is a boon to people as they manage healthcare records, which can be its own kind of demon. And then the other thing that I really like about Amy, which you and I kind of discussed before we hopped on, is that it seems really focused on that client intake, that patient intake process, where it can diagnose things and those kinds of issues. And currently in my law firm, I'm looking at our intake process, and one of the things that I did was create a custom GPT to help my intake team with the intake process. And so I just think that that's an obvious use case, probably an early use case that you could use, because I think people are scared when you think of artificial intelligence and surgery and those kinds of things. But what's even more fascinating is artificial intelligence has already been doing that piece for years, right?
Well, some of it, for sure, it certainly has. And technology has been an integral part of healthcare as things become more and more available. As we spoke about, and as many may know, the Da Vinci system for surgery features robotic arms that are a little more articulate than human hands. And what you can accomplish with that particular robot in this. And I'm going to imagine that they'll integrate AI into scanning a person's interior when they're performing those kinds of surgeries, and then it will prompt or help push the surgeon to make better or less incisions where needed and make better recommendations, or what is the word that I'm looking for?
Like they can respond better on the fly. I think
they can respond better on the fly.
They can process faster than a human can at that point. I also kind of wonder when you talk about like a surgeon cutting and those kinds of things, we're limited by our vision, human vision and our color spectrum. But I kind of wonder, you mentioned scanning at first, and I was like, oh, that's fascinating. Like, not only can it have hands that don't shake, especially as they get older, which here's the thing, like a surgeon is, and correct me if I'm wrong, like I know you worked at a hospital, but my understanding is that like surgeons in a way are kind of like professional athletes, which is, once their hands start to shake, they're done. Their career is over kind of thing. Now, they still have a lot of education and can do other things, but with the help of robotics, a surgeon can gain more and more knowledge, more and more practical experience, and still be useful as a surgeon years and years and years, longer than they would have been otherwise.
And that is very true. I know several surgeons who did hang up their surgical time because they kind of aged out of the program. Like you said, with athletes, they became too unstable or other things. And this technology definitely allows for you to do more precise when your personal hands can't accomplish that. And they've got a number of safeguards on these robots as well that make sure that no damage is done. So if a doctor slips or something and comes out of the harness that you're kind of in, the thing just stops doing anything and other things. So they're going to make it so that it can also be remote. I know that I've heard stories about these robots being remoted from other locations where
so if you have an expert that could do a surgery in multiple states in one day because they're the foremost expert on the issue.
Exactly, and they could connect that way. And so I think as we see AI impact these fields, I think you're going to see kind of some of those standard procedures where things like gallbladder removal and those kind of things, those repetitive surgeries that they're really good at, being created or for lack of a better word, GPT'd, and a robot could just do that and just be supervised by that, and they could process that probably safer, more sterile, in a more sterile environment as well, beyond those other things. But it's aimed to be seen, what's going to happen with these technologies. And I find it fascinating that these opportunities are available, like you were saying, with the remote doctor.
Well, but what do you think, though? Like, I'm curious because I think about this a lot. Like, I agree with you. Like, I believe that in the future, self-driving cars are definitely going to be the thing, right? But I wonder where we get to the point where people accept that on a wide scale. So if I know, for example, that a robot fully autonomous is operating on me, today that scares me a little, right? And I think of there's a video that I saw once of a person at a factory, self-driving cars, those kinds of things. And a bunch of people stood in front of the car as it parked, except it didn't park. It drove headlong into them. And so, 2 or 3 reporters go bouncing off the hood of this car. And it's a scary video. It's a legitimately scary video.
Oh, wow.
And so
no, I've not seen that one.
well, but the thing is that clearly that one scenario is a bad scenario. And I wouldn't stand in front of a parking, car like that in that scenario. But by the same token, when do we get to the point with this technology where people can trust it to okay, I'm going to come into the hospital, I'm going to talk to a robot, I'm going to go to the waiting room, and a robot will come and walk me back, and then I'm going to sit in front of a robot who's going to do a surgery, and I'm not going to talk to a single human. I think we're years and years and years away from that, because I just think that trust to get to that point is going to be far away, regardless of how regulations move and regardless of how many other things move, even though today some of those things are possible in theory and in practice. And so that's a whole other piece to this puzzle that I think is just interesting.
And I think you're correct in some of that. It's going to be years and years down the road that we're going to have a robot walk us back to our room or something of that nature. But you can already see the acceptance of these remote diagnoses and those kind of things because of the pandemic and how, everyone had to do remote medicine. In certain cases where mental health specifically was done very remotely, and a lot of these things kind of got shut down during the pandemic. But with AI powering these options, we're going to see more acceptance and more buy-in from the population to get these things done.
Right. And I think that's important. I do think that while this technology is amazing and working well, I also think that there's a piece here where, it's not perfect, right? ChatGPT will confidently say things that are totally false. But when I have tested it, for example, in the law firm context, it's interesting, ChatGPT will try not to give me answers sometimes because law is obviously a sensitive topic, but it's the work that I do. And I assume it's the same with medicine. I think I've asked it a couple of, medicine type questions here and there, but it'll always be but check with a professional. Or sometimes when I ask it a law question, it's talk to a lawyer. I'm I am a lawyer. But the thing is some of the ways I get around that is I'll ask it to role play, and give me what what someone in this situation would do. And which makes it less frustrating when I talk to it as a lawyer. But it's fascinating that I think it does a pretty good job. Most of the time, I would say high 80s to mid 90s, it can get legal conclusions correct. Now the problem is when you have people, bad lawyers who don't check their work and those kinds of things. Obviously, those are making headlines. But I worry about that for doctors too. Like I don't know how to point out a bad doctor until it's too late, and so there's a piece here where the technology exists, but you've got to train the people who use it first, and that's a whole other thing.
Well, and that's what I tell everyone that I speak to about AI is make sure, because it is not infallible, it is created by people. Yes, it has a vast database backing it up, but it is not infallible. And you, as the expert, you need to vet whatever content is being created. And I think we'll see the same thing happening in the medical space with this, especially when it comes to surgeries or even diagnoses, to have that backup and that check to make sure that, yes, it is correct. I mean, we've seen things with like Amy and prior AI attempts with diagnosing things that, yes, it can be more efficient and it can be more accurate than a real person, but that human element is what a lot of people still like to have with that care, because that's what it is. It's care, and people like care from other humans, right? So
yeah, that is an interesting thing to think about. There's trust, and then there's no substitute for human care. I know that there's all sorts of kind of new age things out there, sci-fi stuff about how computers might replace loved ones, and I know that that's a big issue as well. Maybe we'll talk about that down the road, like chatbots and relationships with AI.
Cyber girlfriends, woo!
Cyber girlfriends. But yeah, I mean, there's no substitute for a real human being when it comes to empathy and those kinds of things.
Well, let's talk about the Amy though for a little bit more, and what you and I were talking about earlier about AI. The AI Amy is, they've programmed it to be empathetic and more. The other words to really dig into that person's situation. And you commented when we were talking about it that you found these AI platforms to be more empathetic than humans. So what do you see on that horizon for AI use? Do you see that being a plus, or is that a minus when it comes to that human interaction?
I mean, I think that there will be scenarios in the future where we'll interact with AI and not be explicitly told that it is artificial intelligence, and frankly, not even know at first. Like, I think AI will take over a receptionist's position in the next 10 years. Like, and then I think at first, in that period, we'll be like, did I just talk to a human or a robot? And then eventually we'll get to a point where we know that it's a robot because nobody does that as human work anymore. Like, I think that that's just what's going to happen. And so I think that will be interesting. But when it comes to empathy, I think it's good that the robot expresses human-like empathy. I think that this can only be positive. And then, I was talking to somebody recently, and they mentioned that when it comes to artificial intelligence, like some call centers have given an AI assistant to their employees. And the results from the study that they ran was that an experienced assistant didn't really benefit from the AI assistant, but new employees were 40% more accurate on the answers they gave and got up to speed and trained that much more quickly. And so when you think about how a robot expresses empathy, I think it could be a good teaching tool. I think it could be a good example of like, hey, in our corporation or our company, this is how we do this. And it can provide an empathetic model that humans can then follow, and probably more consistently than you would typically train. And so I could see the empathy being a net positive. But I do think that when we have our discussion on ethics and AI, that's probably something we should dig into and just talk about, like, hey, how empathetic do we need to make a robot? And then also, I'm going to go off on a bit of a tangent here. I recently read, finally, Never Split the Difference with Chris Voss. And I know that when GPTs first came out, there was the negotiator GPT, right? And I asked it, hey, what's your programming instructions? What do you do? and then it says, "Oh, I'm based on the negotiation method from the book Getting to Yes," which Chris Voss kind of says is not as effective as his method. And so then I decided that I would ask a GPT to use the method from Never Split the Difference and help me develop a negotiation, which I did. And then I asked it to assume different tones of voice. Hey, be a counterpart that's passive aggressive. Be a counterpart that's very aggressive and direct, right? And so it's interesting to see how the computer can adopt different tones of voice. And so it's just interesting. And we see Elon Musk is programming Grok or whatever to be super snarky. And so the different tones that different computers can talk to us in will be limitless, almost like a human, except that it won't be human. And so I don't really know where that goes, except for to say that it's something that should be part of the conversation.
Right. Yes, it definitely should be. And as you were speaking about those kind of things, it made me laugh because you look at, and I'm going to go back to pop culture because, all this science fiction stuff is now becoming reality. And you talk about the different personalities, and we look at the personalities of R2-D2 and C-3PO and other androids or droids. And you can see, their programmers definitely had an idea in place when they programmed them. And so again, these are fascinating tools, but there is a human element behind it programming these things. And so that's going to shine through in some cases. And it'll be interesting to see as these AI personalities get developed, what becomes of them.
Right. I wanted to touch base on some of the medical or healthcare applications of artificial intelligence, just to make sure we kind of touch on these. So Amy, of course, is the most prominent that we've seen lately with Google but it seems primarily designed for like intake purposes, initial diagnoses, very helpful. And I think probably one of the first ways that AI will be widely adopted in the healthcare industry. I think it's a smart move on the part of Google. But there are some other ways that we looked into this. And so clinical trials, helping design, manage, and identify suitable candidates for clinical trials. I think that's a fascinating application. And hopefully, it can be used on both sides of the bureaucracy, like not only by private players, but by government players to quickly understand this data. Be helpful.
Right.
But then also, let's see. One of the ways that I think is amazing. Designing drugs. Designing
drugs and medications. Designing protocols. I think protocol treatments is going to be very fascinating as they aggregate all this data from treatments of X, Y, or Z. I mean, years ago, the treatment for a knee replacement, for example, basically was bed rest. But now, today, they have you up and walking day of surgery, typically, if you can do it, and exercising those muscles. I mean, you've just had if you've seen these surgeries, they can be kind of gruesome, but your leg disassembled and then reassembled, and yet they're having you walk on it. So we're going to see as data gets aggregated and get brought together that the protocols are going to change for a lot of things as these AI with more comprehensive and more vast databases can look at that data and then make different inferences that maybe as a human we don't have the capacity to see all of those data points at once, and they will.
I think so. Data analysis is going to be a big application in healthcare. I think that's going to be a big application across a variety of industries, but I think it has the potential to identify treatments that work, treatments that don't work, but also it'll identify staff that work and don't work, doctors that work and don't work. And I know that replacing people is one of the big concerns here, but I think, again, training people to use artificial intelligence in beneficial ways is a big piece of this puzzle, in how it's used in healthcare, how it's used in other ways as well.
Well, it's like I've told many people, AI won't replace your job, but someone who is using it will.
Yes. Yeah. And we've talked about that, and we'll keep talking about it. So I see a lot of ways for artificial intelligence to be used in healthcare. There's the human interface, there's the actual surgery, there's the data combination. What about privacy? What do you think about, like, people are crazy enough about like, hey, I want to make sure that nobody has this. And I don't mean crazy in a bad way. Like, I think privacy rights are a good thing. I want to clarify that.
Right.
But like, I know that people are hot and bothered about how our data is used today. But to know that my information is going to be processed by some machine and I don't know what's going to happen with it, how much of a concern do you think that is? Like,
that
really, honestly.
That is an interesting question because there's so many tools now that previously you could say they weren't AI backed, but they have databases of I have an app on my phone that is basically just a repository of all the tests that I've been sent through, all the labs that I've done, all of this data that has been accumulated on my person. And they do their best, as with banks or other institutions of sensitive data, to make sure that it's safeguarded and kept away from nefarious parties. But there's only so much you can do because technology continues to expand and continues to grow, and there are always those individuals that are seeking to do damage of one kind or another. Right. And they're doing their best to safeguard it. So that's my answer, is really people are going to do their best to safeguard this information. For me personally, I don't have any health issues that you could spout to the world and it would be okay, know. But I know that there are some that are a little more cautious than I am and are a little more private, and they deserve that opportunity and they deserve that respect. So I think we'll see more security backing this, and probably more compartmentalized as the AI continues to serve that information to us. So I think it'll be harder because the AI, as we've talked about before, as the AI begins to learn, and all these AI systems, they'll begin to see how to safeguard their own information, and they'll learn from that. So I think the security aspect is going to be very interesting. Harkens back to when Tony Stark is trying to get the nuclear codes or stop the AI from getting the nuclear codes, and he's trying to figure out what it is. And so we're going to see those kind of things as these AI learn on the data that they're gathering right now, or that they're being allowed to gather.
Right. Yeah, my hope is that much of the data remains, studied in an anonymous fashion, but how that comes about is going to be obviously a topic of great debate. We're already seeing on the copyright law side of things, people coming to ChatGPT or OpenAI and saying, hey, look, we know that this is a copyright violation because you can dictate to me word for word, pieces of our articles or portions of my book. And so these are concerns that, the law is going to look at. And it's interesting because sometimes courts will come down on the side of technology and not necessarily the law. They'll say, look, this is a big enough public benefit that we want this to keep going. I'm very curious to see how the first cases that come up, I imagine they're going to come down on the side of the law initially. But we're going to see some crazy advances with artificial intelligence and ask ourselves some very difficult questions about whether legal frameworks hold up. And I think that that's definitely true about artificial intelligence in healthcare as well.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's very interesting, all of these things, and how this process is going on. One of the things that you mentioned earlier is where you were talking about AI and how it assumed various roles. That's one of the things that's very interesting about Google's Amy, is that they the self-play or the role play that they put it through, where it was both a patient and a doctor, and that interplay, and it was kind of self-trained how to create those interactions. And by all rights, they talk about that adding to its empathy and seeing it from both perspectives. Again, it goes to the old adage, walk a mile in someone's shoes if you want to know who they are, right? So it's trying to see that, and we'll see a lot of interplay with that as people like yourself continue to role play with the AI and make it work in that capacity.
I think it's interesting too, because you mentioned its empathy and those kinds of things. Like, bedside manner is a big deal when it comes to healthcare, and some doctors have it and some doctors do not. My brother-in-law is a doctor, and he mentioned that he had to take a bedside manner course, right? Like they discussed the issue.
Oh, really?
Which
That's
is important.
fascinating.
Well,
Oh, yeah,
it's funny.
no, I agree.
You have to train a human to do that, but a computer kind of instinctively knows how to treat you.
Well,
I think it's fascinating, right?
I don't know that the computer instinctively knows. It's also been trained. It just it assumes that training a lot easier and faster because it's a binary choice. You know, it's a 1 or a 0 that was clicked in its framework that pushed it into that particular thing. But you talk about the empathy, and we've all been sick. Every one of us has been sick, and probably every one of us has gone to the hospital. And when we're there, you know, what are the things that we want from the patient care team that is taking care of us? We want empathy. We want sympathy. We want, you know, our pain to decrease. We want so many things that are a more human-centric thing. So in this particular aspect, I think it definitely really has to focus on that empathetic plane.
Cool. Thanks, Warren. I appreciate it. This is a wrap on our discussion of artificial intelligence in the healthcare industry. Thank you for visiting us here on our channel. We look forward to coming back next week with more interesting topics. Please check out our YouTube channel, where we have our Midjourney Monday post, where we look at how to use Midjourney, and more conversations and information about how we use ChatGPT, how we use artificial intelligence in our careers and in our different business pursuits. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe below, and we'll see you next week.